Hello everyone and welcome to OTC Monday, where we're going to be talking about how Claudio Ranieri has turned around Roma. And it's been an extraordinary season. I've seen them under all three coaches this season, Daniele De Rossi, Ivan Juric and Claudio Ranieri in the flesh. A very different experience in each of those, and maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later. But it's remarkable that after a three-coach season, which normally spells absolute disaster, Roma are in a position where they can still qualify for the Champions League on the last weekend of Serie A. It's an amazing story, and it centres all around that man Ranieri, who got an incredible reception on Sunday night as Roma hosted their last home game of the season against Milan. A big game in the calendar anyway, but one that they had to win to secure European football for next season, which they have done, but also to keep alive hopes of finishing in the top four. And Ranieri has been behind it all. Bear in mind that he took over in November as their third coach of the season. Of course, Daniele De Rossi, one of the most esteemed characters in the history of the club, was sacked after 4 games. And then Ivan Juric, who has managed to really upset 2 sets of fans with Roma and Southampton, then got fired after it got a bit worse. And Ranieri picked up a team in November that was trying not to get relegated. That's the situation that they were in. You know, European football had been all but written off really already in the season because it had been so bad up until that point. And because there was still such residual anger at the firing of De Rossi, who, as we said, probably only Francesco Totti is the more popular person than him in the history of the club. After 4 games, after he'd been given a big transfer window, with, I guess, in a sort of manner that a lot of fans weren't really happy with as well. He wasn't really showing much gratitude or sensitivity or respect. Juric was brought in, and it never really felt like he had the chops for a job as big as Roma. And, of course, he was always on a hiding to nothing, as he realised, because the fans still wanted De Rossi, and I was so angry with the owners about how they treated De Rossi as well, that any decision of theirs was seen as something to kick back against. So Ranieri coming out of retirement to help Roma out, and that's what he did in his own words. It wasn't just to get them up the table. It was to, I guess, detoxify the season that was unravelling really badly. After there'd been hope, when they'd signed players of substance during the summer as well, when they'd held on to Paulo Dybala, which maybe wasn't quite the plan of the club, but anyway, something that really pleased the fans, it was fair to say. Now, Ranieri, not only does he know the club and has done it before and all the rest of it, but he was born in Rome. He's a true Romanista, a Roma fan, as was said in the banner that greeted him when he came out for the game against Milan, his final home game, of course, because he's going to leave at the end of the season. He said it was only for the rest of the season. And I guess what he's done tactically is worthy of discussion, but I think the fact that he could just calm everyone down and create this kind of semi-truce between the supporters and the Friedkins, the owners of the club, was really, really important. And maybe it was only him that could do that with his understanding of the club and the city. He was someone who, you know, people couldn't be angry with, and they didn't want to be angry with. But then I think we get to the point where he's so well received, not just because of what he means to Roma, and they showed their appreciation, the fans, in that final home game with this incredible choreo, and you could see him maybe getting a little bit teary as that was happening, although he had his professional game face on with it being a must-win game and all the rest of it. But I think it showed an understanding of what an unbelievable job he's done as well, and that was part of the appreciation, I think, against Milan. Now, if you go back to earlier in the week, they lost 2-1 at Atalanta, a result that qualified Atalanta automatically for a return to the Champions League, and they've now secured 3rd place. Now, that was amazing in the sense that Roma could have won that game. They didn't. They, however, had lost just a first game in Serie A since the middle of December. That's the relentless consistency under Ranieri. Picked up almost more points than anyone else apart from Napoli in that period. And, I think you look at the fact that he's 73 years old. When he first took a coach's job, I was 9 years old. That's how long ago it was. And yet, I think almost like Carlo Ancelotti, he's had his guiding principles and his way he likes to play the game, and Ranieri is quite a safety-first coach, is fair to say. But also he's managed to adapt, to adjust to any sort of situation. And of course, the situation that he took on when he came in November was a really, really tough one. And he worked at getting leaders on the pitch. I think Mats Hummels, who'd not really been used to that point, and part of that, of course, was the fact that Hummels hadn't really had a pre-season. He left Borussia Dortmund at the end of last season and then signed quite late, so he didn't have pre-season training with the club or with any club, so he clearly needed to get to fitness. But that he introduced Hummels in a back three really, I think, identified the need for leadership and also identified a way that Roma could have that sort of security to first actually be competitive in games, to use the statement of Xabi Alonso when he spoke to me last year about how he went through his stages at Bayer Leverkusen. His idea was to, because he took them over when they're quite near the bottom of the league, make us competitive, get us to a point where we can actually win games, and then get us to a point where we can dominate games. And it feels like that has been the Ranieri plan as well. So even though Hummels hasn't been included in recent weeks, I think his inclusion in the initial part of Ranieri's tenure is actually quite important. And especially when some of the senior players, like Brian Cristante, who scored a brilliant goal actually in this win over Milan on Sunday night to seal the deal, and the captain, Lorenzo Pellegrini, they were meant to be his leaders, but they'd massively fallen out with the fans as well. The fans blamed them for the sacking of De Rossi. And actually, some of them blamed them as well for the end of the Mourinho regime when he had left midway or two-thirds through the previous season. Now, when I saw Roma play at home last, it was when Juric was still in charge. And not only was Juric the target of a lot of anger from the home fans, but so was Cristante, for example. And that's very, very difficult for a player to live with, especially with Roma having such a passionate fan base. With going back over the last couple of years, they've sold most of their games out. They get really big crowds, and that is a big crowd to have on your back at Olimpico. And it's a really hard stadium to fill. Of course, one of the amazing things that Jose Mourinho did was make sure they filled the stadium again. No mean feat at all. And so you can understand, with Ranieri having turned things around, with him having tactically given them that layer of security, with him over time reintroducing Pellegrini, who scored a vital goal in the derby when he was given a start in that, going back to January when they beat Lazio, that he's managed to cope with the loss of Paulo Dybala, who went down with an injury 6 to 8 weeks ago and hasn't been able to play for the rest of the time. He's been like their mascot on the side of the pitch, on the bench with the subs and the technical staff. He's done something amazing, and I think pretty much all of those players are grateful for what he's done for them. Not just Cristante, not just Pellegrini, not just Hummels to a lesser extent. But I think you look at Angelino, for example, whose career had really run aground in the last couple of years. Came over from Galatasaray, where he had a really poor first half of last season. And I think really he was identified by Ranieri as an attacking outlet. A wing back who's really a wing back, who's not a left back at all, and looks really exposed in a four-man defence. And when I talked about Ranieri evolving, I think this is part of it, understanding what the situation needs. Because if you go back over his career, 4-4-2 is his preference. But that doesn't mean he's completely glued to it. So like an Ancelotti, like an Antonio Conte, he understands what's in front of him and says, rather than impose my style on the players, I need to lean into something that's going to make these players comfortable. I'm going to make them give their best, be able to do their best, bring out the best of themselves, and want to run through brick walls for me as well, which they definitely have. The squad absolutely love him. He's been asked loads of times to stay. He's always been quite insistent that he's just coming out of retirement temporarily. And in fact, there was another nod to that after the game, when he got his guard of honour going onto the pitch, and when he went round the curvas waving to the fans and all the rest of it, he had two of his grandchildren with him, which I thought was a lovely touch. It's just a little reminder that, Grandad's just come back for a little work placement, and then he's going to go back and retire. Not totally retire, because Florent Ghisolfi, the sporting director of Roma, who's had quite a challenging job since he came in, he underlined on television before the game that Ranieri would have a definite role at the club. He would be a special advisor going forward, and they need to keep that experience in the tent. It really feels like that, and Ranieri is going to have a huge part in choosing his successor. Of course, Gianpiero Gasperini of Atalanta, a guy not that much younger than him, actually, about 6 years younger than him, was linked with a job because he said he's going to leave Atalanta at the end of his contract in 2026. Maybe sooner, who knows. Francesco Farioli, who's just left Ajax after they lost the league on the final day of the season. He would be another candidate. They might even go a little bit younger, and maybe if the new guy could lean on the experience of Ranieri, someone a little bit younger. I mean, it doesn't look like they're going to get Cesc Fabregas from Como, who was also of interest to them. Maybe that younger guy could be something that worked out for them, because they could be playing in the Champions League next season. And what an incredible legacy that would be for Ranieri. What they have to do on the final day, they go into the final day in 5th place, only the top 4, with England and Spain having the extra Champions League places, is good enough in Serie A to qualify for the Champions League. We know that 3 of those Champions League places are already taken by Napoli, Inter, whatever the result of the title on the final day, and Atalanta. So Juventus in 4th. At the moment, Roma just behind, and they need to better the result of Juventus. Now, I suppose the advantage for Roma going into that final day is that Juventus go to Venezia, who are one of the weaker teams in the division, of course, but need to win to have any chance of staying up after their 3-0 defeat to Cagliari on Sunday night. And Roma go to Torino, who don't really have anything to play for as well. So it feels as if the advantage should be on Roma's side. And, under Ranieri, they've been brilliant at grinding out results. Not always played fantastically well. And Miles Svilar, their goalkeeper, has been fantastic in recent weeks too. They even made quite heavy weather of it when Milan went down to 10 men on Sunday night. Santi Jimenez getting sent off. And even after that, Joao Felix equalised before Roma rallied in the second half and got the goals from Leandro Paredes and Cristante that saw them over the line. So, look, they do have a chance. I feel they will all feel around the club that the season has been a massive success just through the fact that they've got into Europe at all. And they've had so much success, of course, in the Europa League and the Conference League in recent years. So any sort of European football is good European football. Roma have been one of the constants for Italy in European club competition over recent years. And also, they'll feel this season, or the back end of this season, has been such a success because of the good feeling that Ranieri has brought back into the club. So even though that there's work to do going forward, Roma have got a lot of things to be optimistic for. They've got good players and a good squad. It remains to be seen if Dybala will stay next season, but it seems that his desire is to do so. It feels that if he's going to link better and better with Artem Dovbyk, who's recovered from a difficult start to the season. Pichichi last season in La Liga, but really tough for him to settle in to a club that was in footballing and a boardroom chaos really at the start of the season, with such a terrible relationship with the supporters after that firing of Daniele De Rossi. So it feels as if this team has got some way to go with the right players strengthening it. And also, they're on the way to building a new stadium. They couldn't quite break ground last week due to some local protesters who want the site protected and don't want it to be a football stadium. But that looks like it's coming along. They've got past most of the complicated planning issues that were holding it up. And the Friedkins, at least, are holding up that end of the bargain. They've always invested their own money in the club. And I think once Roma have got their own stadium, I guess like Juventus before them, they can generate their own money, that they can not spend on rent, that they can keep more of the receipts. That will be an absolute game changer for them as they attempt to crack the top 4 on a regular basis. But, of course, the Champions League money from next season, if they were to make it, would be very, very helpful indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here every Monday on the OTC YouTube channel looking at one of the big stories from the weekend that's just been. Of course, subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We're out every Thursday, me and Dotun Adebayo and one of our brilliant guests talking about the biggest stories in European football. And every Friday on the pod, it's Ask OTC, where we answer your questions. That's right, your questions. So leave them below the line. Get at us on socials. We will speak to you again next week.